The medieval Eurasian steppe remains an enigmatic land for many reasons. To begin with, it was once home to countless nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples who were locked in constant conflict, setting off great waves of migration across the span of history. Another reason lies in the fact that most of these peoples left behind almost no written records from which we might truly identify them. The Pechenegs were one such group, appearing sporadically in the historical record, most notably in the writings of the Byzantine court. The Pechenegs, like those who came before and after them on the steppe, had a deep fondness for battle. In fact, Emperor Constantine VII of Byzantium wrote at length about their passion for plunder, something we shall return to later. Yet this appetite for raiding tells us little about who the Pechenegs themselves really were. In today's episode, we shall attempt to answer the question: who, in truth, were the Pechenegs? Although the precise origins of the Pechenegs remain disputed, historians generally agree that it was the collapse of the Turkic Khaganate in the year 744 and the subsequent wars that followed, which set in motion the westward migrations of the Pechenegs, a people themselves of Turkic stock. It appears that the Pechenegs found themselves at a disadvantage within the constantly shifting tribal alliances that arose in the wake of the Khaganate's downfall and were pressed hard by a coalition of Oghuz, Karluks, and Kimaks. By the middle of the 9th century, they had been driven from their ancestral lands around the Aral Sea and forced to migrate westward, entering the Black Sea steppe between the Volga and Ural rivers. It is likely that during this same period, some Pechenegs remained behind in the Aral region and were gradually absorbed into the Oghuz community. As Constantine VII would later write, when the Pechenegs were expelled from their homeland, certain individuals, by their own choice, stayed and merged with the group known as the Uz. To this very day, their descendants still dwell within that community. Upon settling in their new lands, the Pechenegs continued to live much as they always had, maintaining a nomadic existence that included the traditional activity of raiding. Unsurprisingly, this brought them into bitter conflict with their neighbors, to the point that the Pechenegs were once more compelled to move west. On this occasion, the Khazars, who had borne the brunt of their depredations, joined forces with the Uz to drive them out. Possessing the greater numbers, they succeeded. Once again, the Pechenegs were forced further along their journey, moving west across the breadth of Khazar territory before halting at the upper reaches of the Dniester River. Here, in this new domain, the Pechenegs appear to have flourished. Indeed, by the 10th century, they had established control over much of the Pontic steppe in southeastern Europe, as well as over the Crimean Peninsula. Their ascendancy was likely aided by the decline of their longtime adversaries, the Khazars. The campaigns of Sviatoslav of Kiev against the Khazars during the 960s destroyed the fortress city of Sarkel, and, soon after, the Khazar capital of Atil. This crippling blow ensured that the Khazar Empire would never recover. Naturally, the Pechenegs took full advantage of Khazar weakness, launching repeated raids deep into their territories. Moreover, their dominance on the Pontic steppe was further reinforced by the fact that the Magyars, who had once dwelt there, had themselves been driven out by Pecheneg arms. All of these geopolitical upheavals elevated the Pechenegs to the status of a dominant power on the Pontic steppe at the dawn of the 10th century. And, as with any warlike nomadic community, every sedentary state that bordered them was eager to court their friendship, partly to employ them as mercenaries, but mostly to avoid becoming the next target of Pecheneg raids. It was this very obsession with raiding that would, in the end, bring about their downfall, as we shall later see. But before examining their decline, let us first look more closely at Pecheneg society to better understand this nomadic people. As a Turkic nation, it should come as little surprise that the Pechenegs spoke a language belonging to the Turkic family. Yet its precise classification remains difficult, for the tongue itself has long since become extinct. Most scholars agree that it likely belonged to the Oghuz branch of Turkic. With no surviving descendant languages, identifying Pecheneg speech with certainty is nearly impossible, though contemporary sources do provide us with a few tantalizing clues. The Byzantine princess Anna Komnene, writing in the 12th century, described the Pechenegs as speaking the same language as the Cumans. This observation was further supported by the 11th century scholar Mahmud al-Kashgari, who asserted that Pecheneg was indeed an Oghuz language and a variant of Cuman. He also noted that the Pecheneg speech bore traces of foreign influence, setting it apart from other Turkic tongues. When it comes to the Pechenegs, the most important historical source is the De Administrando Imperio of Constantine VII. The Byzantine emperor composed this work as a handbook of governance for his son, and as such, he provided detailed accounts of Byzantium's neighbors. In his sections on the Pechenegs, Constantine described their internal social organization as consisting of 8 tribes, each ruled by its own chieftain, and further subdivided into 40 smaller groups, most likely extended clans. He even went so far as to record the names of these 8 tribes, which has prompted endless speculation regarding their meaning. The historian Peter Golden has argued that each tribal name comprised an adjective indicating a color combined with the traditional title of the chieftain. For example, the 5th tribe bore the name Kara Bey, Bey being a traditional Turkic title for a chief, while Kara could mean black, or else refer to the gleaming hue of polished steel. Notably, Constantine also recorded that the first 3 tribes, Ertim, Kwar, and Ulu, were known collectively as the Kangar, perhaps an ethnonym in its own right. These 3 tribes were described as braver and more noble than all the others. Pecheneg society also differed from that of their neighbors in matters of inheritance. Rather than following the common practice of primogeniture, whereby the eldest son would succeed his father, the Pechenegs employed another system. Succession favored the chieftain's cousins. This arrangement created a framework in which power was distributed across a wider portion of the ruling clan, limiting the authority of any single chieftain to his own period of rule, and in doing so, helped to prevent the kind of bloody internal struggles that so often plagued other nomadic polities. The writings of Constantine VII are filled with descriptions of Pecheneg military prowess, underscoring the warlike nature of their society, which revolved in no small part around conflict and raiding. He emphasized that they were fervent marauders and thus greatly feared by all their neighbors. Economically, the Pechenegs appear to have lived in the classical nomadic style, raising cattle and other livestock, while moving regularly throughout the year in search of the best pastures. As with all nomadic peoples, trade with settled communities was crucial to their economy, for their itinerant lifestyle made the production of certain goods exceedingly difficult. Constantine records, for example, that the Pechenegs would sell cattle and sheep to the Rus when they were not engaged in raiding. Indeed, trade between the Pechenegs and Byzantium seems to have been conducted primarily through the city of Cherson in Crimea. Constantine's text also notes that some Pecheneg groups served the Khazars, presumably as mercenaries, in return for rewards such as purple ribbons, loosely woven cloth, gold brocade, pepper, scarlet fabric, and Persian leather. For all their reputation as a warlike nation, it is clear that the Pechenegs also relished opportunities for commerce with their neighbors during times of peace. Their presence in Constantine's De Administrando Imperio demonstrates the important role this nomadic confederation played in Byzantine diplomacy during the 10th century. The fear their neighbors held of Pecheneg raids made them a powerful political tool, though they were equally notorious for being difficult to control. The Byzantines adopted a policy of divide and rule toward the peoples of the northern steppe, seeking to use the Pechenegs to sow discord among neighboring communities, keeping them so occupied that they could not threaten the empire. In De Administrando Imperio, Constantine explained that, by maintaining an alliance with the Pechenegs, Byzantium could deter both the Turkic tribes and the Rus. As long as the Roman emperor remained on friendly terms with the Pechenegs, neither the Rus nor the Turks could attack imperial territory by force, nor could they demand vast tributes in exchange for peace. If, for instance, the Rus wished to strike against Byzantium, they would be forced to march through Pecheneg lands to reach Constantinople. Moreover, while the Rus armies were away campaigning, their homeland would be left vulnerable to Pecheneg raids. According to this strategy, Constantine also outlined the procedures for concluding agreements with the Pechenegs, chiefly through letters and gifts. He recommended dispatching imperial envoys to the city of Cherson to meet with Pecheneg leaders, and stressed the importance of using hostages as guarantees for the safety of Byzantine representatives. The Kangar theory is one of the most intriguing hypotheses concerning the origins of the Pechenegs. The Kangar Union was a Turkic polity that existed from the middle of the 7th century to the middle of the 8th in what is now modern Kazakhstan. Kangar is understood as an ethnonym, perhaps a Turkic rendering of Kangju, a people related to the Kazakhs and Karakalpaks. It was the raiding campaigns of the Arabs and the Oghuz Turks that shattered the Kangar state, bringing about the dissolution of the Union. 3 Kangar tribes dwelling in the Sir, Darya, and Aral region allied themselves with 5 other Turkic tribes, forming the Pecheneg Confederation and migrating westward into Eastern Europe. This accords neatly with Constantine, the 7th's description of the Pechenegs as having 8 tribes, 3 of which were Kangar, braver and nobler than the rest. An alternative hypothesis, proposed by Omelian Pritsak, and building upon the Kangar theory, suggested that the name Kangar was in fact a compound, Kan meaning stone in Old Tocharian, and Gar, an ethnonym. Tocharian was an extinct language once spoken in the Tarim Basin of northwestern China between the 5th and 8th centuries. From this, Pritsak speculated that the Pechenegs may originally have been Tocharian speakers from this region, or at the very least people heavily influenced by them, who may have formed alliances with Eastern Iranian and Turkic groups. He further argued that the Kangar, speakers of Tocharian, once lived around Tashkent, its name meaning city of stone. He also linked the Kangar to a community recorded in Chinese sources of the 2nd century, described as the Kangju Tribal Confederation. This Kangju Union was composed of 2 groups, one nomadic and the other settled, dwelling in the oasis towns around the Tarim Basin. Taking advantage of the trade routes that passed through the region, Pritsak believed that both groups shared the Tocharian language and developed a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. In a similar fashion, the Kangar may have lived along the Sir Darya, centered upon Tashkent, and forged alliances with Turkic nomads, from which the Pecheneg Confederation ultimately emerged. Another theory, which may be seen as a complement to both the Kangar and Tocharian hypotheses, is the theory of Turkification. This argument holds that the Pechenegs descended from an early Turkic nomadic group that once inhabited the Iranian cities of Transoxiana while maintaining a pastoral lifestyle. A wave of Turkic migration during the 6th century had Turkified much of the Iranian population in this region. By the same token, communities along the Sir Darya, including the Kangar, reflected this cultural transformation. Later conflicts with the Oghuz, Kipchaks, and Kimaks compelled the Pechenegs to migrate west. The near-universal scholarly consensus that Pecheneg society bore distinct Turkic characteristics lends weight to this hypothesis. By the 10th century, as noted earlier, the Pechenegs had risen to supremacy on the northern shores of the Black Sea, owing both to their own raiding activities and to their employment as mercenaries. Even after settling in this region, their incursions did not diminish. All of their neighbors fell victim to their predations at one time or another, but the Bulgarians and the Kievan Rus were their most frequent targets. In keeping with nomadic custom, his skull was fashioned into a drinking cup by the Pecheneg Khan, Kuria. It was these continual wars with the Rus that gradually pushed the Pechenegs toward extinction. Vladimir I of Kiev defeated them in their own homeland, and Yaroslav of Kiev dealt them another crushing blow in the year 1063. Their aura of invincibility collapsed, and Pecheneg power swiftly declined. Though they continued to serve as mercenaries, their sphere of influence shrank dramatically. Their final defeat, as an independent force, came at the Battle of Livounian in the year 1091, when a combined Byzantine-Cuman army under Alexios I Komnenos utterly destroyed the Pecheneg host. The survivors were resettled in Macedonia, in what is today Greece. Their last recorded appearance in the historical record was in the year 1122, when they rose in rebellion against Byzantium, but were crushed at the Battle of Beroia. After this, the Pechenegs appear to have lost their distinct identity, disappearing into the surrounding populations among whom they had once been feared. And that is the story for today. Thank you for watching until the very end. If you enjoy videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you receive a notification each time we release a new one.